Easter Sunday, 1975, Hamilton, Ohio. Children were running across freshly cut lawns, searching for plastic eggs hidden in the grass. Sloppy Joes were warming on the stove. 11 people were gathered inside a house on Minor Avenue, laughing, living, just being a family. By evening, every single one of them was dead, and the only person left standing was the one who called the police. Now, before we go any further, in the spirit of Easter, drop a comment right now. Tell me, what does Easter mean to you? Is it a religious celebration, a family tradition, a reason to gather with the people you love? Because that's exactly what it was for the Rupperts. Easter has been observed for over 2,000 years. For Christians, it marks the resurrection of Jesus Christ, a day of renewal, of hope, of coming together. Even for families who weren't deeply religious, Easter in 1975 meant one thing: everyone comes home. That's what makes what happened on Minor Avenue so impossible to process. By the end of this documentary, you're going to understand how one man's entire life built toward a single Sunday afternoon. You're going to see every warning sign that was missed, every question investigators couldn't answer. And you're going to be left with one question of your own, one that even the courts could never fully resolve. Was what happened inside that house a sudden, catastrophic mental collapse? Or was it something far more deliberate?
Along those same lines, Doctor, isn't it true that you have no way of telling the court what Mr. Ruppert's ability to rationally discuss the case with his attorneys, to rationally assist in the preparation of a defense would be if he were not under the effect of either a major tranquilizer such as Thorazine or Trilofan at this time? Isn't that right?
I have no specific way of telling that other than to say that during the course of my examination with him, he was able at that time and under that condition with that dosage of medication to rationally confer with me and talk to me about what had happened.
635 Minor Avenue, Hamilton, Ohio, a working-class neighborhood about 30 miles north of Cincinnati. Tree-lined streets, row houses with small front yards, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors by name. The Ruppert family had been part of this community for years. Charity Ruppert, a 65-year-old woman, owned the modest two-story home on Minor Avenue. She was a woman who had raised 2 sons largely on her own after losing her husband young. Her oldest son, Leonard Ruppert Jr., had done everything right. He had earned a degree in electrical engineering. He worked at General Electric. He owned his own home in Fairfield, Ohio. He was married to a woman named Alma, and together they had 8 children. 8. Their names were Leonard III, age 17, Michael, 16, Thomas, 15, Carol, 13, Anne, 12, David, 11, Teresa, 9, and the youngest, John, just 4 years old. On Easter Sunday, March 30th, 1975, Leonard and Alma loaded their children into the car and drove to Grandma Charity's house on Minor Avenue. The morning had been beautiful. They'd attended Easter Vigil Mass at Sacred Heart Church the night before. The kids had done an Easter egg hunt in the front yard. Charity was in the kitchen, making sloppy joes. Leonard and Alma sat at the kitchen table. The children were scattered between the kitchen and the living room, doing what children do on a Sunday afternoon. 11 people. One house, and upstairs, sleeping off a night of drinking, was Charity's other son, James. James Urban Ruppert was born March 29, 1934. The day before the massacre, he turned 41. On paper, he was unremarkable, 5'6", 135 pounds, described by neighbors as quiet, bookish, helpful, no criminal record, no history of violence. But behind that quietness, there was a life that had been accumulating damage for decades. James was the second-born son, and from the very beginning, his mother Charity made something clear. She had wanted a daughter, and James, by simply existing, was a disappointment. Some testimony later suggested she had even dressed him as a girl when he was small. She called him a mistake. His father, Leonard Sr., wasn't a warmth. He was a violent man with a short temper who held little affection for either of his boys. He died of tuberculosis in 1946 when James was just 12. That's when things got worse. Leonard Jr., 2 years older, became the man of the house, and he made sure James felt it. He taunted him, picked on him relentlessly, turned him into the lesser of the two brothers, consistently and without apology. At 16, James was so miserable that he ran away from home. He tried to hang himself with a bedsheet. He survived, and went right back home. Because there was nowhere else to go. As the years passed, James watched his brother outrun him in every direction. Leonard Jr. graduated college, got the engineering degree, got the good job, and then, almost as if to seal it, Leonard Jr. married Alma. Alma, one of the only 2 girlfriends James had ever had. James, meanwhile, dropped out of college after 2 years, trained as a draftsman, never held a steady job. By 1975, he was 41 years old, unemployed, and living with his mother. He lost money in the 1973 to 1974 stock market crash. He owed his mother $3,500. He owed his brother another $1,000. He went to the same bar nearly every night, the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge, sat in the same seat next to the payphone and drank until closing. And somewhere inside all of that, something had been getting darker. Here's where it gets strange. A month before Easter Sunday, James walked into a store to buy ammunition. While he was there, he asked about silencers for his weapons. Let that sit for a second. He wasn't asking theoretically. He wanted to know how to make his guns quieter. Nobody flagged it. On March 29th, his 41st birthday, witnesses spotted James along the banks of the Great Miami River, shooting tin cans with his .22 pistol and rifle. Target practice on his birthday. That night, he went to the 19th hole as always. He talked to Wanda Bishop, a 28-year-old employee who knew him well, and he told her something that should have chilled everyone who heard it. He said he was fed up with his mother's demands. He said she was threatening to evict him. And then he said he needed to solve the problem. He left the bar at 11 p.m. He came back an hour later. When Wanda saw him return, she asked if he'd solved it. He looked at her and said, "No, not yet." He stayed until the bar closed at 2:30 in the morning. The next day was Easter Sunday. James slept most of Easter morning, upstairs, horizontal, silent, while his nieces and nephews hunted for Easter eggs in the yard below his window. At some point that afternoon, he came downstairs briefly. He and Leonard exchanged a few words. Leonard asked him, casually, offhandedly, "How's your Volkswagen running, Jim?" That was it. That was the question. James took it as a judgment, an insult from the successful brother, a reminder of everything he wasn't. He turned around and went back upstairs, and when he came back down, he was carrying 4 loaded guns, a .357 Magnum, 2.22 caliber handguns, and an 18-shot .22 caliber rifle. He had loaded all 4 before he descended the stairs. At around 4 p.m., he entered the kitchen. His mother was at the stove. Leonard and Alma were at the table. 3 of the children were nearby. He shot Leonard first, once, in the head. Then he shot Alma. Then, as his own mother lunged at him to stop him, he shot Charity. Once in the chest, once in the head, again to make sure. Then he moved to the children in the kitchen. David, Teresa, Carol. Then he turned the corner into the living room. Anne was sitting next to her Easter basket. He shot her. Then Leonard III, Michael, Thomas, and finally, 4-year-old John. The Easter candy scattered across the floor was spattered with blood. It was over in less than 5 minutes. He had fired 44 shots. 40 found their targets. I have to stop here for a second, because everything I've just told you is documented, verified, court-recorded, and it raises a question that requires answers to, at what point in James Ruppert's life do you think this became inevitable? Was it the night at the bar? Was it something that happened decades earlier? Drop your answer below, because as we go deeper into this story, your answer might change. Here's the part that never stops being strange. After James Ruppert killed 11 people in his mother's house, he didn't run. He didn't panic. He didn't call anyone. He lay down on the couch. According to a psychiatrist who later testified at trial, James had contemplated killing himself in those hours. But he stopped, because he believed suicide was a mortal sin. So he just sat there for 3 hours, surrounded by 11 bodies, in a house where the blood from the first floor was literally dripping through the floorboards into the basement. At some point, he picked up the phone. He called the police, and he said 4 words: "There's been a shooting." When officers arrived, James was standing just inside the front door, calm, waiting. The detective who walked into that house later described it as a slaughterhouse. The prosecutor, John Holcomb, said there was so much blood on the first floor it was seeping down into the basement. In the upstairs bedroom, investigators found a book about how to commit a perfect murder. Let that land. A man who claimed he acted in a sudden, uncontrollable rage owned a book about planning the perfect killing, and he kept it upstairs, in the same house where 11 people just died. Police expected chaos. They got something more disturbing. Every victim had been shot at least once to bring them down, and then shot again to make sure they were dead. The only sign of struggle in the entire house was a single overturned waste paper bin. No one had escaped. No one had made it to a door. No one had even made it to a phone. 11 people, 3 adults, 8 children ranging from 4 to 17, and not one of them had gotten out. Forensics confirmed all 4 weapons belonged to James. Gunshot residue was consistent with his firing position. There was no sign of a second shooter, no forced entry, no intruder, no unknown presence, just James. He refused to answer questions. He was cooperative only in the sense that he didn't resist arrest. But from the moment he was taken into custody, he made one thing crystal clear. He was going to plead insanity. And that's where the story became something else entirely. Before we get into the trials, because there were multiple, if you're watching this and you want more documentaries like this one, subscribe right now. We cover cases that most people have never heard of, and we go deeper than the headlines. One click, that's it. Now. Back to James Ruppert. The prosecution had a theory. John Holcomb, the Butler County prosecutor, walked out of that crime scene and landed on one word: calculation. He believed James Ruppert had not snapped. He believed James Ruppert had planned. Here's what Holcomb pointed to. James owed his mother $3,500 and his brother $1,000. He had less than $1,500 in savings. His stock investments had collapsed. He was about to be evicted from the only home he had. But the combined estate of his mother and his brother? An estimated $300,000. Prosecutors argued that if every Ruppert in that house died, James stood to inherit everything. He had asked about silencers a month before. He had practiced shooting the day before. He had told a bartender he needed to solve the problem. And then he came downstairs with 4 loaded guns and ensured that not one person, not even a 4-year-old, survived to contest the inheritance. And here's one detail that Karen Holcomb, who wrote the prosecutor's own account of this case, uncovered decades later. The shootings happened at 6 p.m. That's the exact moment the church bells of Hamilton were ringing across the neighborhood, every Sunday evening, without fail. James Ruppert didn't just choose Easter. He may have timed it to the bells, so the neighbors wouldn't hear a thing. The defense saw something different. Defense attorney Hugh Holbrook personally funded the hiring of psychiatrists and psychologists from across the country. They argued that James had suffered a complete psychological break, that decades of rejection, humiliation, and paranoia had shattered his grip on reality, that he genuinely believed his mother and brother had been conspiring against him with the FBI to destroy his life. The 2 psychiatrists testified that James suffered from paranoia and delusions of persecution. One of them, from Harvard University, said that if there had been more people in that house, they likely would have been killed too. In his closing arguments, prosecutor John Holcomb said something that has never left this case. He told the court that in that house on Minor Avenue, 600 years of human existence were thrown in the wastebasket in under 5 minutes. 600 years, 11 lives, careers never started, children never had, grandchildren never born, all of it gone. So which was it? A man who killed for money? Or a man whose mind had been breaking for 40 years? The first trial was held in Hamilton in June 1975. James chose to be judged by 3 judges instead of a jury. He was erroneously told that all 3 judges had to agree to convict him. 2 found him guilty on all 11 counts of aggravated murder. 1 found him not guilty by reason of insanity. James argued later that he thought the verdict had to be unanimous. A mistrial was declared. The retrial moved to Findlay, Ohio, 125 miles north, because it was determined he could not receive a fair trial in Hamilton. In July 1975, James received 11 consecutive life sentences. He would have needed to serve 176 years. He appealed. In 1982, a new trial was granted. During that second trial, in front of a jury, one of the jurors collapsed and died of a heart attack after seeing crime scene photographs. The jury ultimately convicted James on 2 counts of first-degree murder, his mother, Charity, and his brother, Leonard Jr. For the other 9, including the 8 children, they found him not guilty by reason of insanity. 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. The prosecution was furious. The victims' families were devastated. It's worth pausing here to remember what this community had already lived through. On April 4, 1975, just 5 days after the massacre, Leonard, Alma, Charity, and all 8 children were honored at a funeral mass at Sacred Heart of Jesus Church. More than 700 people attended, and when it was time to take them to Arlington Memorial Gardens, the caskets arrived in a procession of 11 hearses. 11, one after another down the street. The friends of the children served as pallbearers. Edna Allgaier, the mother of Alma Ruppert, grandmother to those 8 children, stood in the courthouse and said something that stays with you. She blamed James not for 11 deaths, but for 13. Because 3 years after the massacre on Easter morning 1978, Alma's father, unable to carry the grief any longer, shot himself in the head at 4:30 in the morning. The massacre didn't end in 1975. It just kept claiming people. If this story is hitting differently than you expected, share this story with someone who needs to see it. Not because it's shocking, but because this family, all 11 of them, deserve to be remembered. Leonard, Alma, Charity, Leonard III, Michael, Thomas, Carol, Ann, David, Teresa, and little John. Their names should not be forgotten. Share this. Let's make sure they aren't. James Ruppert entered the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction in 1982. Inmate number A169321. He spent the following decades largely in silence. He was moved between institutions as his health deteriorated. In 1995, at age 61, he appeared before the State Parole Board. Denied. In 2005, at 71. Denied. In 2015, at 81. The Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution Parole Board released a statement. The board has determined that the inmate is not suitable for release at this time. A parole hearing had been scheduled for April 2025. He never made it. On June 4, 2022, James Urban Ruppert died at the Franklin Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio. He was 88 years old. He had lived 47 years longer than the family he destroyed in under 5 minutes. The house at 635 Minor Avenue is still standing. Locals still call it the Ruppert House. Cars still slow down when they pass it. One woman who bought it in 2008, not knowing its history until after she'd signed contracts, said when she finally walked through it with fresh eyes, she noticed the floorboards. Stains that could not be fully removed. The contents of the house were auctioned off publicly 1 year after the murders. The first family to rent it moved out quickly, reporting voices, lights switching on and off, footsteps coming down the stairs. Whether you believe in any of that or not, There's something undeniable about a place where 11 people drew their last breath in the same afternoon. Here is what we know. James Ruppert, 1 month before Easter, asked about silencers. James Ruppert, the day before Easter, practiced shooting along the river. James Ruppert, the night before Easter, sat at a bar and said he had a problem to solve. James Ruppert, on Easter Sunday, loaded 4 weapons before he came downstairs. He shot every single person in that house. He doubled back on victims to make sure none of them survived. He then lay down, waited 3 hours, and called the police himself, and yet a court of law found him not guilty by reason of insanity for 9 of those 11 murders. So here is the question that has followed this case for 50 years. Was James Ruppert a broken man who finally shattered under a lifetime of failure and rejection? Or was he a man who had been quietly, methodically planning for a long time, and who used an insanity defense to try and walk free with $300,000? The prosecutor believed one thing. The defense believed the other. The courts gave you a split answer. What do you believe? Drop it in the comments. Because in cases like this, the truth tends to live somewhere between the legal verdict and what we're willing to say out loud. 11 people walked into that house on Easter Sunday. They were there for dinner. Say for family. For the kind of ordinary day that you don't think twice about until it's gone. James made sure none of them left, and he died in a prison hospital at 88 years old, never having fully explained why.